So we move on to the next session, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce my former colleague, Jim Zimmer, who really has been a leader in learning outcomes and teaching and learning at Mount Royal for many years, and he's going to talk about Mount Royal to some extent, and I think the Alberta context. And I was thinking a bit about the Mount Royal experience and what Jim maybe will say, and not to steal his thunder, though goodness knows I did it often enough when we worked together. But I was thinking of the Joni Mitchell lines. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow. And Mount Royal has done it both ways. They've done it from the courses and program level up, and then from the institutional level down, if that's quite the way to put it. So whether he'll talk about clouds illusions, Jim Zimmer.
Well, thank you, Robin. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. As Robin said, my name's Jim Zimmer. I'm the Associate Vice President for Teaching and Learning here at Mount Royal University, where I have worked since 1995, so just over 20 years. The theme of the next couple of hours really is best practices in Alberta, or promising practices in Alberta. I am going to talk pretty much exclusively about our experience at Mount Royal. A little bit later in this session, we will have 5 presenters giving many talks on their best practices at their institutions, and we will introduce those folks a little bit later. As suggested by the title of my presentation, this is in essence a case study of outcomes at Mount Royal over the past 20 years. So 20 years in 20 minutes. That's a bit of a challenge. I want to be clear that I'm in no way holding up Mount Royal as a benchmark institution for outcomes and assessment in Alberta. As is the case for most of us, outcomes and assessment are very much a work in process. Having said that, we've been thrashing around in this area a bit longer than many, and so have accrued some lessons learned and a few scars that we can share. A little bit about me. I came to Mount Royal in 1995 to teach nursing, having taught nursing for the previous 10 years in the Ontario Community College system and in Alberta at the Foothills Hospital School of Nursing. Shortly after arriving at Mount Royal, I accepted a curriculum coordinator position in the Academic Development Center, our teaching learning center at Mount Royal. My principal responsibility in this newly created position would be to lead on behalf of the Office of the VP Academic, a new college-wide curriculum renewal initiative in which outcomes would be a defining feature. Having been at the college for only a year, I was pretty naive about what it was that I was getting into, and that was probably a good thing. What do I recall of Mount Royal College in 1996? Well, it was an institution whose program mix included applied degrees, 2-year diplomas, 1-year certificates, and a very large university transfer operation. About 50% of our enrollments at that time were wrapped up in university transfer activity. A technology environment in which computers were being rolled out to faculty desktops for the very first time. A fledgling teaching learning center being populated with full-time faculty members, of which I was one for the first time. And I remember MRC 2005, a 10-year institutional strategic plan with the following priorities: enhancing quality of academic programs, student services, facilities, and equipment, supporting people with an emphasis on professional development for staff and faculty, germane to today, renewing curriculum, incorporating abilities and skills for the new economy, and emphasizing learning outcomes, and lastly, emphasizing results, the assessment of student outcomes. I mention this because this vision, MRC 2005, was a real, something we could really latch on to in moving this work forward. It gave legitimacy to this work at Mount Royal College at that time. Mount Royal decided that being an outcomes-focused institution meant that we would have outcomes at 3 levels: course, program, and college-wide. An early and critical first step for Mount Royal in moving forward was establishing the Faculty Curriculum Group, the FCG, a cross-institutional faculty committee charged with leading on-the-ground implementation of outcomes. As curriculum coordinator in the Teaching Learning Center, I chaired this committee, while the faculty reps were carefully selected by their deans. All were tenured, all were experienced, all were key influencers in their faculties, and importantly, not all were outcomes cheerleaders. Faculty Curriculum Group was a standing committee that existed outside of our academic council structure, and so was not subject to that group's constantly changing membership. This resulted in a continuity and consistency of membership that enabled the initiative to get traction and build momentum. I can't emphasize strongly enough how important this group of faculty was in moving outcomes forward at Mount Royal. Faculty-led, administratively driven, and supported was an oft-repeated mantra concerning the Outcomes Initiative in those critical early years. We studied and learned from the work of others in outcomes and assessment. All members of the Faculty Curriculum Group and many others from across campus visited Alberta College in Milwaukee and participated in their week-long institute on outcomes and assessment. Others traveled to King's College in Pennsylvania, Clark College in Washington State, Western Wyoming Community College in Rock Springs, to see how outcomes were being implemented in various institutions. Members of the Faculty Curriculum Group were funded to attend annual conferences such as the American Association of Higher Education Assessment Conference. I'm guessing many of us heard Trudy Banta speak there during those years. And it goes without saying that curriculum renewal and outcomes work at Mount Royal was very generously funded by the administration of the day. Whether this level of support would be possible in today's fiscal circumstance is unclear. We developed in-house resources and materials to help faculty along. And while a plethora of good resources existed external to Mount Royal, we felt it was important to have materials developed in-house by our Faculty Curriculum Group. FCG members were well aware of the not invented here syndrome and felt that made at Mount Royal resources stood a better chance of actually being used than something we imported from the outside. We launched a newsletter, the FCG Update, to keep faculty and others across the college apprised of the latest developments related to outcomes and curriculum renewal. And we worked toward what would become our own college-wide learning outcomes by surveying our faculty and members of our program advisory committees in 1998. The faculty survey was based on research published in Change magazine in 1997. Briefly, it asked faculty to rate on a 7-point scale the importance of 27 different higher ed outcomes, from critical thinking, through leadership, through acquisition of a second language. Faculty were then asked to identify for them the 5 outcomes they felt were most critical. 125 faculty members responded to our survey, roughly half or more of the full-time faculty complement at that time. Looking only at those outcomes which registered 40 or more votes, we see that the top 7 were as follows: critical thinking, written communication, information access and retrieval skills, oral communication, ethics, values, and integrity, interpersonal communication, and problem solving. I'm not sure if any of those are a surprise to anyone in the room. In addition to surveying faculty for perspectives on the most critical outcomes of Mount Royal education, we invited faculty to share any comments they had about the Outcomes Initiative more broadly. The following are representative of what they shared back with us. You can see in this slide that it was a very mixed bag. The Outcomes Initiative had many very strong supporters and others that were less so. The fifth bullet really stands out for me. The whole idea of outcomes-based learning is nonsense, bizarre experimentation with no basis in empirical research. The whole enterprise should be scrapped. The money should be used to buy books for the library. Not atypical. With survey results in hand and following additional consultation with faculty, students, admin, and program advisory committees, Mount Royal's Academic Council and Board of Governors endorsed the following 6 college-wide learning outcomes in spring of 1999. You can see what they were: thinking skills, communication, information retrieval and evaluation, ethical reasoning, group effectiveness, and computer literacy. Shortly thereafter, faculty outcome teams were struck, 1 per outcome. These teams worked to define and describe the outcomes, discuss teaching and assessment strategies particular to each outcome, and prepare resource materials for faculty colleagues to use. These outcome teams ran for several years. They did great work. They produced resources that were really useful to our Teaching Learning Center and to faculty colleagues across the college. Faculty members were asked to embed at least 1 college-wide learning outcome in their courses and assess for it through their course assignments. Faculty were also asked to reference the college-wide learning outcomes in their syllabi and name the specific outcome they had chosen to emphasize in their course. Academic programs, through curriculum mapping facilitated by the Academic Development Center, were asked to ensure that each college-wide outcome received at least some emphasis across the 2, 3, or 4 years of their program. Over a period of 2 to 3 years, academic programs and individual faculty members worked to implement course and program outcomes and integrate college-wide outcomes in course and program curricula. Some very good progress was made. But lest you get the impression that the implementation of outcomes at Mount Royal was a cakewalk, I should state emphatically that it was not. While professional programs like nursing, criminal justice, and early childhood came on board quite readily, other areas resisted or were reticent. Over the course of our early work in outcomes, recurrent tensions, challenges, and questions surfaced. I'll share them with you now because A, I suspect they're not unique to Mount Royal, and B, regrettably, I suspect they are timeless. Why are we doing this? A common question. For me, helping to lead the work, outcomes and assessment were truly about strengthening curricula, improving student learning, and enhancing program quality. This is still true for me today. Others, though, were more skeptical. Is this just a marketing ploy? A strategy for differentiating Mount Royal? A neoliberal agenda to graduate more work-ready widgets for the economy? The flavor of the month. What about my academic freedom? Some of you may be familiar with this one. I've heard it a couple times already this morning. Why bother with learning outcomes when we're already grading our students? Doesn't a pass mean anything? Variations to approaches to curriculum development. This was a major eye-opener for me coming out of nursing, to learn that many areas didn't start the curriculum development process as we did in nursing, by collectively articulating a vision of the graduate, followed by program outcomes, course curricula, and so on. I was shocked, in fact, to learn that some areas didn't build curriculum together at all, that it was a very solitary activity, that a program was essentially a cobbled together collection of courses. Outcomes without assessment is just PR. Well, I think we've heard from both Trudy and Sandy that outcomes can stand alone. They're much more powerful coupled with assessment, to be sure, but outcomes serve a purpose in and of themselves. And because of our very large university transfer operation, university transfer was a particular challenge for outcomes work. Less set curriculum, more one-off teaching, lack of a longitudinal trajectory, curriculum largely prescribed by another institution. I found a great quote in some transcripts. Thanks, Robin. Found a great quote in some transcripts in my files about the difficulty of university transfer from a Dean's Council meeting back in 1998. University transfer poses a significant challenge for outcomes. It's the most formless area and is susceptible to the influence of outside agencies. It is the most mystical in its orientation. Like that a lot. In the early to mid 2000s, with the outcome side of the equation well on its way in most areas, the college turned its attention to assessment. The faculty curriculum group developed frameworks and templates for the development of program level assessment plans, which were intended to be used on an annual basis. And the Academic Development Center made funding and consultation available to programs to assist in this work. Looking back, some encouraging early assessment work was done at the program level, particularly in the professional program areas. However, it was around this time, the mid-2000s, that Mount Royal entered into a concerted multi-year focus on transition to university status. Discussion of faculty roles and responsibilities, research and scholarship, rank, tenure and promotion, governance models, and so on, dominated the institutional agenda. As a result, the time and energy that faculty had to dedicate to assessment of student learning outcomes was compromised, and momentum, understandably, was lost. Likewise, enthusiasm for our 6 college-wide learning outcomes waned, and questions surfaced in some quarters as to whether we could legitimately call these things outcomes if we were not making an effort to systematically assess them. Following extensive discussion, the Learning Outcomes Standing Committee of General Faculty's Council landed on the American Association of Colleges and Universities' essential learning outcomes and adapted them through consultations with faculty, culminating in the aims of undergraduate education at MRU enshrined in our 2012 academic plan. So a shift from outcomes at the institutional level now to aims. In 2016, outcomes-based curriculum remains a brand pillar for Mount Royal. Our new draft academic plan recommends revisiting the university-wide aims and rededicating to assessment of learning outcomes at the course, program, and university-wide levels. How we go forward remains to be seen, but I'm certain we will draw on our experience of the past 2 decades as we do. Let me close by sharing what I think are some of our key lessons learned in moving outcomes forward. First of all, clear and consistent messaging from the president and the provost that outcomes and assessment are critical, are a priority, is critical. As I mentioned earlier, this was very much an asset to us in our early work on learning outcomes, that we could tie it directly to an institutional strategic plan. Coupled with that, resourcing that backs up the rhetoric, As I've alluded to, a strong, stable, and representative faculty committee to lead the work, faculty-led, administratively driven. A carefully considered role for the Institutional Teaching Learning Center. In looking back, I wonder a little bit if our Teaching Learning Center back in the day, back in the mid-90s, was tasked with a little too much leadership in this, and that in certain areas of the institution, it had an adverse spin-off effect in terms of folks that didn't buy into outcomes and began referring to the Teaching Learning Center as the outcomes police and those sorts of things. So be cautious about that, I would say. Begin where people are at. You will have on your campuses folks in nursing and teacher education for whom this comes very naturally. Maybe folks in trades and technology for whom it's all new. And then others in areas like English and humanities who may want nothing to do with this. But we need to be creative to find ways to enter into conversations with all of those folks if we're going to move this forward. Again, on reflection, I would say, and I think we've heard some allusions to this already this morning, begin, maybe at least initially, with work at the course and program level, which is, for most faculty, where their principal allegiance will lie, their discipline, their program. And in reality, if they do a good job on their program level learning outcomes, they will, in many instances, cover off what we would articulate as college-wide learning outcomes anyway. Incentives, rewards, and recognition of all different types are important. At Mount Royal, we've managed to weave some of this into our tenure and promotion procedures, our criteria for distinguished faculty awards, funding opportunities that are available to faculty and departments for retreats and facilitation and so on. As we've heard this morning, you can think about other levers that you have at your disposal for moving outcomes and assessment forward. Program approval, course approval, program review. It'll be interesting to see the role that the Quality Council takes on in helping us move this work forward, outcomes and assessment. And lastly, I would say, value the conversations that this all generates, because those can be the most powerful impact, I think, of the whole exercise, is when faculty get together either within disciplines or across disciplines, talk about teaching and learning, talk about the outcomes they're wanting to cultivate in their students, and talk about how they teach for them and assess for them. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Couple of questions.
Thanks very much, Jim. We'll just take a couple of minutes if there are a couple of questions, and there'll be other opportunities later in the day. But anything that, sure, that's sparked a lot of questions, but anything that anyone would like to ask right away.
So you mentioned a lot about how faculty were involved in the process. What role did students play in the implementation of learning outcomes in your trajectory through Mount Royal College to MRU and implementing them campus-wide?
Well, in the early days, students were part of the consultation process that led us to arrive at those 6 college-wide learning outcomes. I certainly did a couple of slides on what the faculty had to say about it, but students were part of that process as well, along with our program advisory committees. I think in retrospect, we probably could have involved students more deliberately and intentionally along the way, and as we move forward, we probably will here at Mount Royal. Yeah, thanks for your question.
I'm curious about whether you could expand a bit on your comment related to the role of the Teaching and Learning Center. Mm-hmm. And particularly, I'm curious about whether you could frame it around notions of expertise. And the reason is because I was really intrigued that the forum today has brought in different kinds of experts. Mm-hmm. So we have expert scholars, in learning outcomes, and we have expert practitioners. And the notion of academic freedom was brought up, which sort of denotes or connotes maybe a particular form of expertise around what it means to be a teacher. And so all of that is swirling around for me. And then you brought up the role of the Learning and Teaching Center. So I'm just curious about some comments related to expertise and how that can play out given that whole landscape.
Sure. Well, with respect to the teaching learning centers particularly, I think it's increasingly the case that curriculum consulting of some sort is a feature in many teaching learning centers. It certainly is the case with us. And so over time, our teaching learning center has evolved some fairly sophisticated curriculum mapping, facilitation approaches and tools, focus groups, surveys, and so on. And so they are a very instrumental part of what we're doing here at Mount Royal with outcomes and assessment. And I'm getting the impression that that's the case at many institutions that are represented here today. What I'm advising a little bit of caution about is the extent to which the Teaching Learning Center is charged with explicitly leading an outcomes assessment work cross-institutionally. Certainly the expertise is there, and there is expertise in other areas of most campuses as well. For example, institutional research offices, can often help with things like surveys and focus groups and have, data banks about, student success and satisfaction and so on. So drawing on all of those areas of expertise, I think, is important as we move forward.
I'm very interested in why a shift occurred from learning outcomes to aims. And because I can see within that there's a kind of an attempt to redefine perhaps when we think about what a learning outcome is, because it seems to celebrate a kind of openness or value a certain kind of openness that sometimes when we talk about outcomes suggests something that is more instrumental,
right? And
we don't want to necessarily embrace.
So I think the essence of the question, if you weren't able to hear it, is why did we go from outcomes to aims? Well, that's a very complicated question. And it took us about 3 or 4 years of discussion before we finally landed on that decision. But what it came down to really more than anything, a couple things I would say. We had institutional outcomes that we were not assessing in any deliberate way, in any systematic or deliberate way, in any authentic way. And for some folks in the institution, that implied that we really shouldn't be referring to them as outcomes, because outcomes do imply assessment. They do at the course level. They're starting to at the program level, but we weren't doing anything at the institutional level. So that was part of it. We still wanted something at the institutional level that was aspirational, that generated conversations about what programs might want to do curricularly and pedagogically and co-curricularly. We wanted something, but we didn't want outcomes, at least at that time. The other thing I would say is that we had by 2012 transitioned into our new undergraduate university status. And so we began looking at outcome sets or aim sets or principles that Trudy mentioned earlier this morning that were more in keeping with what an undergraduate degree looks like, often with a general education or a liberal education component, something that encompassed that. So I would say those are two of the biggest factors that moved us from outcomes to aims.
So thanks very much, Jim. We will have an opportunity to hear from him a bit more later in the day, but thanks for that and for drawing our attention to your experience at Mount Royal. As we said at the beginning, Mount Royal's been a fabulous host, just to change gears for a moment, a fabulous host for this day, making it possible for us to be here and helping out with the cost of that. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce another former colleague from Mount Royal, its president, David Doherty. David is a political scientist by discipline. We used to chivvy back and forth on that because I'm not a political scientist. He was at Wilfrid Laurier University before he came to Mount Royal as Dean of Arts, and then a role in the Provost office, and he is, I guess it's 5 years? David has been president of Mount Royal. So thanks for being here, David. I know you're busy in between meetings. It's great that you could be here, and I hope you could stay for lunch, but I'd like to ask you to say a word or two.
Thank you, Robin. And it's always nice to have you back on campus. I deliberately don't wear ties when Robin's here because I know I just can't compete. So welcome, everybody. This is a great day, and I trust you're enjoying yourself. I caught part of the last part of Jim's talk, and when I was thinking about who's at this meeting in terms of provosts, associate provosts, deans, members from ACAT, from ACAD, from government, I was thinking the brain power in this room, it reminded me of the quote, and I'll throw a historian something here, it reminded me of the quote of JFK when he was entertaining Nobel Prize winners in the White House, and he said, "Never has so much brain power been in this room since Thomas Jefferson dined here alone." So welcome. It's an important topic you're covering today. It's an important, challenging one. I think about when I think about what we do, all of us generically, and think about when we were coming up with our institutional strategic plan. One of the thoughts we had in consultation was, in talking about the importance of learning outcomes, learning aims, was really around the transition that post-secondaries are making, be they colleges, universities, the technical institutes, ACAD. It really is thinking about the students that many of us will find on our doorstep for the first time in September. Their first job when they graduate may not exist yet. And so understanding that, I think, kind of places an importance in terms of learning outcomes and aims and preparing students in that generic sense. We at Mount Royal, I'm very proud of the number of group projects we have for our students in all kinds of fields, from public relations to nursing, to business, to health and community studies, to art, many of the arts programs. And I get a chance to walk around and meet the students as they do their poster presentations, science and tech as well, and they're absolutely fabulous. But I always ask the same question. One of the questions I ask every single group I meet, and perhaps it's nursing students, and they're doing a project on nutrition in nursing homes, and there's 6 students working together on this project. And the question I'll ask them, whether it's that or whether it's science students, is the same, and that is, what skill did you learn on this project? What did you learn working on this project that you will use 15 years from now, solving a problem that has nothing to do with nutrition in seniors' homes? Because that's what we do, and that's the skill set that we provide them. That's the lasting, I think we incorrectly sometimes refer to them as the soft skills, but they're the real skills. They're the important skills, and making sure that we teach that and learn that, and those are part of our learning objectives, our learning aims and learning outcomes, and be able to understand that students have those skill set are critically important. So I thank you for the time and effort that you're spending on this today. We're more than happy to host you here for this. I'd also be remiss if as a university president, if I didn't tell you to take advantage to spend a little bit of time walking around. I know you're the type of folks that are 24/7. Be 18/6 for a little bit, and walk around and enjoy our lovely campus. Walk through the corridor if you want, and see the amazing Taylor Center for Performing Arts, if you haven't had a chance to already. An 800-seat concert hall that I believe is the best in Canada. Absolutely unbelievable, and a project that was supported by the amazing Taylor family, the provincial government, the federal government, and the city of Calgary. And then you'll see outside across from it the Riddell Library and Learning Center, which will open its doors at about this time next year, which is just another great, fabulous spot that has all kinds of opportunities when you think about the way students learn and how we're embracing that in the new library and learning center is truly amazing. You can walk around to the pond, you can take a look at the East residences, which are a vestige of the '88 Olympics, but still provide all kinds of housing for our students, and our newer residences. Take a walk along the pond. I'm reminded of what I say to my son, who's spending some time with us when he says he wants to come to Mount Royal, to the athletic facilities, and I said, you know, using that line from Caddyshack, we've got a pond, we've got a pool. Pond would be good for you, son. But take a look and enjoy some of this great weather and the amazing campus that we have. So thank you for coming here. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll break for lunch now, I guess. Is that what we're doing? Or I'll turn it back to you to direct the proceedings. Yeah.
Thanks, David. Just a couple of things. It is lunchtime. We'll go there quickly. So could I just ask the reporters from the tables to bring the notes that they wrote up to the front table so we can hang on to that, because we will be trying to write a report on this day. And just to remind you that this is a touring lunch, so have a look at the poster displays around the back of the room, and I think, Jim, you'll be coming back to those and referring to those in the next session. So, lunchtime.